Welcome to the Awe and Wonder podcast from the Special Education Technology Center. We're in Series 2, Leaders and Changemakers, and we are excited to have two leaders and changemakers with us today who have a really great background from the school district side of things and really lots of perspectives to share with us. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Sarah Kinsella. As always, we have
I'm Brenda Del Monte, and Barb, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm Barb Lark, and just a little background. I'm a retired SLP from the Everett School District and worked in assistive technology as well.
Wonderful. And Cathy?
Okay, my name's Cathy Hoesterey. I live in Bellevue, Washington. I'm an occupational therapist by training, and I worked pretty much exclusively in assistive tech for over 22 years. I started my career at Children's Hospital in Seattle, and then I moved to Bellevue Schools in the early 80s as an OT. And then in 2000, I became the Assistive Technology coordinator. And I retired about a year ago from Bellevue Schools. So I'm currently sort of exploring some opportunities to be a consultant. But yeah, that's my background.
So have you worked directly together?
Yeah, well, yes and no.
Let's say closely.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you feel like that you support each other when you're going through things and you're wanting somebody who knows where you're at and you bounce an idea off? Is that kind of the more of the relationship, almost an ongoing companionship there?
Great question. Cathy's been my go-to person for about 20 years.
Wow.
Yep.
And
Barb
you know
and
a lot
I
of
were
people.
both, yeah, Barb and I were both very involved in kind of setting up the AT regional meetings early on through SETC. They kind of helped sponsor that. And so that's kind of where our relationship started, I believe. And then we also intersected some at SETC. We both have been on staff there.
Right.
So
those AT regional meetings, for those who don't know, maybe you don't live in Washington State, but assistive technology regional meetings where people who are interested in AT, doesn't matter what you do, a teacher, a SLP, OT, a parent, people who have an interest in AT come together, and Barb and Cathy help facilitate these groups so we could share resources and ask questions, and depending on what your region was, and then became a statewide meeting where we'd all at least once or twice a year come together and have the meetings. And those are invaluable. I just love that. Thank you guys for doing that.
And for listeners who maybe don't know this, both Sarah and I have worked at Everett School District at some point and with Barb. And
that's right.
I didn't say under Barb because that is not the way she leads. She doesn't lead top down. And so I would say that the AT meetings are the regional meetings are the same format in the sense that one thing I appreciate about your leadership is that you're going to coordinate collaboration. You're not running that show. You're not the one standing at the podium and taking questions. That's not the way I've ever seen either of you lead before, but you're more like, let's get people together, because if we put all our heads together, we'll probably come up with something really good. And I love right off the bat, I just love the model that you both have had in the state of Washington.
Well put.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd say that came from necessity because both Cathy and I were one of the first AT facilitators for a school district in the state. As far as we were among a small group. We weren't the first, but we were among a small group. And at that point, when we started the AT teams, regional teams group, was a necessity for all of us to make our way through what was quite a new field.
Right, right. And you're all kind of on your own island in your own district because you're the only one, and they only had one at the time. If you were an AT person, you were the AT person in your district, and then you built those programs and you built other people around you. But, you didn't have other people in the district that were doing your job. The district had one of you, when it first started, right? So you had to talk to other people who were navigating this, and there was no handbook. There was no, I mean, job description, even, honestly. Even by the time I
That's
did it,
true.
I
Yeah.
remember refining a job description because they didn't know what to say. So, I mean, this is really this was cutting edge stuff. And you're kind of, I think one of the themes we're seeing along this whole series is people that are going, yeah, I don't know how to do it, but I'll give it a shot. I mean, that's kind of there's some guiding principles among all of you who we admire. And it's like, they didn't have the answers and they tried it anyways. And so not being a perfectionist, not needing to have all the answers, being willing to collaborate and learn as you go, which is hard to do. It's hard to take those risks.
Well, and you developed those teams when you did. What year do you think you guys first started? Each of you, about when was that?
Close to 2000. When you say Anne Black was still at SETC,
Yeah.
and she helped.
I think 1999.
99, 2000.
Yeah.
Okay, developing those AT teams. And we still have, districts and teams within the state that are in the position of building a team, right? Or maybe they've had a team and they're working on refining it or changing the model of what that looks like, maybe. And so what kind of guiding principles have stayed from that experience that you had building those teams, but also throughout your career, regardless of advancements in technology? Because we know technology changes, but there are things that don't change and that are always true for assistive technology and for our students. Barb, I'll start with you.
I was hoping you'd start with Cathy.
Okay.
I'd say some of the guiding principles for starting an assistive tech, or for working in the field of assistive technology within a school district, is that you can't work in a silo. You have to work with you have to have administrative support, and that really takes quite a bit of legwork and education to get that, and you have to communicate your goals across your district, and that means to people that you work with directly in special education, but also people that you work with indirectly in technology and in general education. I know Cathy has done quite a bit of work with her technology IT department.
Yes. Cathy, tell us about that, because I've heard a lot about that too. And what does that look like when you're working with IT department?
So I just think that was a super important thing that fortunately, we worked on the same campus. My office was on the same campus with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to insert myself as much as possible in their leadership meetings, their finance meetings, things like that. I know it takes extra time, but it's super important. And we were able to get a lot of our funding through tech levy type funding or more district funds than just special education. So that really enabled us to buy more iPads, even, lots of different devices even came out of funds, not exclusively special education. So that was one piece of it. Another was kind of getting them on board and really educating not only the leaders in information technology, but also like the area techs or the people out in the schools. But one thing we would do with the administrators is, they were funding a lot of these devices and stuff. And so we wanted them to see them in action. So we would hold some of our meetings. We had monthly meetings with them. And we held a meeting out at a school, an elementary school at one point, and we did it at a secondary school another time. But we had AAC users come into the room and show how they were using the technology. I mean, that was really life-changing for the administrators to see it in action. And then they got even more supportive, when we asked for tools and that type of thing. So kind of really getting them to understand what AT is all about and seeing it in action, I think was really key. And again, like I said, just be visible too. Be willing to kind of stick your neck out and say, hey, I want to have a voice in this. And even if,
Mhm.
like I said, it means more meetings or that type of thing, it's really worth it.
Right, right.
I love
And
that. I used to describe this as the Bermuda Triangle, sitting in the middle of curriculum, special ed, and tech department. Those were my three corners. And
Mhm.
everybody's like, who's paying for that? Who's doing that? What is that?
Right.
Who does that fall under? And I mean, you're just spinning in that little triangle. And if you're by yourself, Barb, you're not gonna make it, right? And the other thing is I ended up doing what you're saying too, Kathy. And I'd be like, hey, I need you to, fix something on this computer. And I'd say, can you, come at noon? And the tech guy would say, aren't the kids there? And I'm like, yeah, they are there. And then he'd come and he'd see them all. And then I got them, right? So we can be in these meetings and we think we're in curriculum, or we think we're in tech, or we think we're in a special ed director and managing the adults. But when we bring it back to the kids and actually make it less about the technology and more about the kids, we make farther gains in implementing technology, because we don't make the technology the goal, we make the kids the goal,
Yeah.
Right.
I'd like to share one of the things we did early on, and we did it for several years. We'd have an annual open house, and this was before the district tech fairs started. We had an annual assistive technology open house, and we had it in our lending lab. So we didn't go around to other schools. We made everybody come to us, and we had our students demonstrating the technology, and we had passports, so people made sure that they went around to all the different areas. And I think because of that, we 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 were included right away in a prominent location when we did have our district technology fairs.
Yeah. And how did the students, what kind of, what did the students think about that, the open houses?
Oh my gosh, they loved it. And we had it after school, and so their parents came as well. And
Oh,
we kind of made it an extra special celebration because we kind of like to throw parties. And we had a local tex company donate bow ties and cummerbunds. And so everybody wore their white shirts, bow ties and cummerbunds. And they had specific jobs to do, whether it be to show people how to use something like co-writer, or to demonstrate, to have conversations with people using their communication devices, and switch use. And they had specific jobs to do as well. And we ended up doing that when we were involved in the tech fairs too. We ended up having students have specific roles to share what assistive technology was all about.
right. And I'll never forget those tech fairs, because so it's for the whole district, and different schools can showcase what they're working on, whether they have like a robotics club or some sort of technology that they want to highlight. And then Barb and her colleagues would have the most exciting part of the fair, the most interesting, in my opinion. Of course, I was a little biased, but you had a lot of people coming to your table to see what was going on. And one year it was Starbucks, and they all had aprons, and you go around doing things. And it wasn't just, it was so meaningful, and the kids looked like it was so exciting, and everybody just loved it. And I just think, talk about getting out of your silo, that you were there, you were prominent at the fair. I just love that. Kathy, what other guiding principles would you say have stayed regardless of, how technology has advanced or things have changed?
Well, I would also say that, Joy Zabala was kind of a pioneer in the field, and she came up with the SET framework.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's really stood the test of time.
For
So
sure.
for those of you who might not be familiar with it, SET stands for student, environment, task, and tools. And just the whole concept, it's really critical to match the needs of the student with the right tools. And so that's always kind of been in the forefront for me, is I'm looking at students and trying to match students with the right tools. And also, I think, providing support for not only the student, but the staff who's going to be supporting them, and the families. So that in order to ensure success, you really want it to be a team effort, and it can't be just focused on the student. You have to look at the bigger picture.
Right.
Yeah. So,
well,
we still use the set form now, and you kind of think, is there anything, do we need to make it more complicated? No, we don't. Do we need a new form? No. And actually, nobody's putting together anything. It's working. It's still working. And we're not making it harder than it has to be using that form.
Right.
I love that.
And it helps with the mindset shift when you look at student, environment, task, and then tools is that last thing. It's not saying tools, student. And I think that's really, it's subtle in the way it's presented, but it's meaningful when you're working with teams, to start thinking of it that way. Go ahead, Cathy. It looks like you had something else to say.
I was also going to say, our students' needs change over time. And I think the mindset for a lot of families was, oh, they're only going to get this consult once. It's a one and done type thing. And just really reassuring the team and the family and even the student, hey, technology changes, your needs change. This is not a static process. This can be an ongoing type thing. As we find out about new things that might be a good fit for you, or even, sometimes the families would come to us and say, what do you think about? And, just exploring those options and being open to that, I think is important.
Yeah, Cathy, tell us a little bit about how you developed that idea that you can be available. You're busy, you're serving the district, right? And you have essentially any student could be on your caseload in a way at any time, and you have training of teachers and staff. Like you said, it's not just about this one person. So how did you maintain that? And
we ended up it was just too big a job for one person. And especially as the iPads were huge because we had so many we were trying to manage, and, it's really expanding sort of our reach throughout the district and that type of thing. So, we did get some additional staffing, and what we ended up doing was I had been seeing kids all the way from the inclusive preschool program starting age 3 to transition at 21. And essentially all the schools in the district. So once we got some increased staffing, we tried to look at what's a more effective way of doing this. And so maybe one person would be sort of the preschool elementary AT go-to person. That wouldn't, we would share our expertise or consult with each other. But then the staff kind of knew who their go-to person was. And that allowed us to focus a little bit more too, and kind of get to know the staff, and then professional development opportunities at that level and that type of thing. And then somebody else would take secondary. And so towards the end of my time there, we were really focusing more on that. And that seemed to be a little more effective than being spread quite so thin, across the district.
Right. Barb, do you have anything to add on that idea?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that I was actually never in it alone. There was always a team that I worked with, and our team included an occupational therapist and an SLP assistant. And then we would connect with students. We'd connect with that team, and so it was a team to team effort. And so as things grew, our time increased a bit, and then as budgets changed, our times might have decreased a bit. So, but the focus of always having a multidisciplinary team or a transdisciplinary team, working with a transdisciplinary team is really the only way to meet students' needs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and over my career, I worked with a site counselor who worked as an AT specialist. He'd also had a background as a special education teacher, SLPs, OTs. So, a wide range of disciplines too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and again, I never worked in total isolation, but typically I would have more FTE than some of the other supporting people,
Right.
and that gradually changed.
But I think
Right.
we should note the size of the districts you guys were in, because part of the reason, like when I was an AT person, I got 2 days a week. I was the only person because my district was so small. So I think one of the reasons why you guys were able to enter with a team is because you had I mean, I don't know how is Bellevue, and probably is Bellevue the biggest district in Washington? Serving
No, I don't believe so. I think Seattle
is
is
Seattle
much
high?
larger.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's large,
Yeah.
and so is Everett.
And
Right.
Everett is
Mhm.
large. It's just so you guys know, like these are huge districts. So the fact that they weren't alone and they had two other people, I mean, still the volume of the number of kids that potentially needed assistive technology, right? We're not talking just AAC here. We're talking assistive technology, which is a huge net. I mean, is still a daunting task, and when you start to think about, I remember talking to Barb at the time going, okay, my budget's like $5. So what am I saying is my priority? And I guess I wonder that too, like, as you're beginning to advise districts on what they need to purchase. I don't know if you both played with that role as well, but it's like there's serving the high incidence through assistive technology, and then where does the low incidence get the funding and all that kind of thing. Was advising on what the district needed to invest in financially, was that challenging for you?
I think a lot of it depended on our administrative support at the time. And when we started out really looking at high incidence kiddos at the very beginning, but the burgeoning area of assistive technology was providing supports that were universal, that everybody could use, and so quickly went to that. And I appreciated the administration that I worked with in that we were able to look per building within all of our grade levels in our district and set up a standard support for classrooms.
Right.
And what's kind of the basics that you need. And there was the financial support to do that. And that varied over time, but having that kind of a framework for looking at what's it was similar to the tiered levels now. That really helped to kind of operationalize how we looked at spreading around the technology.
Right. And part of that was, so certain classrooms would have a certain software, right? Or that they would have access to, or did they have kits too? Like, was there early learning kits, or?
We developed some kits, but primarily we used our lending library and a lot of training to let people know what was in the lending library and how to use it. And so we did have some kits in terms of some classrooms, depending on their need, got more computer interfaces and more switches, and
right.
and more specialized switches were in our lending library.
Right. Right.
But everybody had voice output switches and to use in their classroom. So in that way, it was kind of that you could call it a kit. That was kind of one of the basic for each classroom.
Right.
Right.
Cathy, I'd love to hear your perspective on this question, and then I'm just dying after this to ask you guys about a student that's inspired you.
We jumped out of order, but we need to get back to that.
But I know you have some really good insight into this financial piece too.
Yeah. So I think when we started, like Barb was saying, around 1999, for me, it was about 2000 where the district said, yes, we need this position with AT specialists. I think back on the devices we're using, like the Dynavox, the Dynamite. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars. And
Yeah.
there was a limit to how many students we could serve.
Right.
And
Right.
so, like, I just think things like the iPod Touch came, as a precursor to the iPad, but
Mm-hmm.
just like getting things that were the families were all on board so much quicker with things like an iPod Touch or an iPad because their child didn't look different and
Right.
they felt comfortable programming it and that type of thing. And then the district was more accepting of it because they were starting to roll them out for other students. So that kind of started the shift towards more things that were universal design. And I think that's been huge. And then our district went to the, laptop for every student initiative. And of course, that was speeded up for a lot of districts because of the pandemic.
Sure.
But again, our students, first, early on when we started we would get the leftover laptops. So the ones that like were on
Mm-hmm.
the end of their life cycle that,
They don't
maybe the
hold a
staff had
charge.
used. Oh, they would
Yeah.
not hold a
They
charge.
I
didn't.
remember
They're
that.
just awful. And
Mm-hmm.
those were given for the special needs students, and they were heavy and they wouldn't hold a charge. And um, the kids didn't want to use them because nobody else was using a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was stigmatizing to use
Mm-hmm.
that.
And it already took a
So,
lot of time to set up things for these kids sometimes,
yeah,
right? We don't need to
yeah,
spend more time. Mm-hmm.
right, right. And so the big shift when everybody had a laptop and we started loading those with universally designed tools, then it wasn't stigmatizing because their peers were using, text to
Mm-hmm.
speech or,
Right.
that a lot of the features that were built into, let's say, Office 365 or something like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been a huge shift in the field, and I think a really exciting shift. And then getting more support from the technology administration and department because we would say, hey, look, this is benefiting all students. It's not just our students that you're purchasing this for,
Right.
but here's what we need, as far as licenses or this type of thing. Um, but you've already got the hardware. So it was a little bit easier sell sometimes to get licenses for software or tools.
Right.
Right.
Right. Love that. Okay, well, I think you're both going to want to answer this question first because I know you're both about the students. You're very student-centered. I know this about you both. This is why we're here, right? What is there a particular student in your career who's inspired you to do more, or kind of your why you're doing things, or what at any part of your career, pre-AT role, post?
Way back in your OT world or in your SLP world and we know that you have so many. It's hard to pick one,
Mm-hmm.
but there are those ones that you still remember what you remember with such clarity that they impacted you.
Yeah. I'll go ahead.
Great.
I'll give you a little background. My pediatric OT fieldwork was at Maplewood School in Edmonds. And at the time, Paul Schweda and Judy McDonald were there, and they were really pioneers. They're the ones that went on to create Co-Writer and that type of thing. But Paul Schweda actually took Apple IIe computers, it was called an adaptive firmware card, so that you could hook up switches in the Apple game port. And
Okay.
so that was some of the really early on computer access
Mm-hmm.
technology. And so I started working for Bellevue Schools shortly after that. And I had a non-speaking high school student with cerebral palsy. And he was obviously very bright, but nobody had been able to kind of tap into that to really know. So he had a really complex body. So regular, like even hand switches were not going to be an option for him. So we rigged up on his wheelchair 2 head switches. And then we programmed it with Morse code. So he learned Morse code and he would type out his communication in Morse code.
Wow.
And one day, I remember I was just fussing around with the setup and I was like really frustrated, like, why isn't this thing working? And then I realized I had reversed his head switches. And as soon as I discovered it, he laughed so hard. And I know he knew way before I did,
yeah.
what the problem was.
Yeah.
And,
He was waiting for you to figure it out.
Yeah, he was just waiting for me to figure it
Yeah.
out. So, yeah, so he really does study. We even did like it was like a really primitive Pong type game that he could do. But again, one of the first times he could play a game with a peer. And
Mm,
that social
Mhm.
connection was just so important. So yeah,
I love that.
he's one that really has always stuck with me.
I
So,
mean,
but
I
Kathy,
love that, but I have to give you credit. Then if he had to learn Morse code, then
mhm,
so did you.
right.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
not that I
So,
But
can remember it that well, but yeah,
but
I
I
had to
mean,
kind of
he was
figure out.
so motivating for you, right?
Right.
You're like,
Oh,
I don't know
oh
this.
yeah.
I don't know how to do this. And that means I'm going
Right.
to have to learn how to do a hard thing, and you're worth it.
Yeah.
And it
Right.
and
yeah,
it
Right.
and it pans
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
to go all in on somebody, even if you don't know what you're doing. And
Right.
they are the ones you remember, and we were just talking about this earlier about not bailing out every new person in the field with a solution and letting them come up with some of their own solutions because they'll be more invested in it. And if they have to
Mhm.
learn a new thing, they will reap the rewards of all the work of that.
Yeah.
So it's as we mentor people through it, it's like, I'm not going to give you the answer. I mean, if you want to try Morse code, go for it. Like, that's probably
Yeah.
not something that's gonna happen now probably, but
Right.
I
Right.
love everything about that story because it shows so much about your willingness to do a hard thing or to put yourself out there and be like, I don't know. I mean,
Mhm. Right.
yeah,
Right.
apparently we can do switches and even head switches, which were not that common. And still we run into people that are so invested in hand switches that we're going to do hand over hand with a
Mhm.
switch instead of independent access with the head, right? So even
Mhm.
all of those pieces were actually pretty not status quo. You did not read that in a textbook. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Yeah.
well, and Kathy, I was thinking along the same things as Brenda said. I think also that, you know, you gave the flexibility. You came in with
Mhm,
flexibility thinking, I don't have an answer right off the bat, probably, right?
mhm,
You didn't meet the
Mhm.
student and then say, we're doing XYZ. And you had flexibility for that student to develop something. But talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, your relationship with that student, because you also need to have some connection before
mhm.
to be able to do things like this and to take these chances, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Well, that's sort of interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but one thing that does come to mind is I had an uncle. My dad's only brother was born in the late 20s in St. Louis, Missouri, with cerebral palsy.
okay.
And from a really young age, I found out that his education ended in St. Louis when he was too heavy to be lifted on to the school bus. The bus driver was the one that made the decision that ended his
Oh,
education. And
Wow.
so for me, like from a pretty young age, I
Yeah.
knew I wanted to be an occupational therapist.
hmm
Oh,
Because I wanted people to be able to have that access and independence. And
yeah.
so
hmm
maybe there was some kind of my uncle cognitively was intact and he was,
Mm,
he was verbal and very capable, but he missed so much of education and, life
wow.
experiences because of access issues. But there was something about Michael that I knew that there was a lot there that just
hmm
he had an opportunity to express himself. So
Mhm,
I think sort of those that ties together that
It
I
mhm,
was
does. Yeah.
motivated because of
mhm.
that.
Yeah. I love that. Barb, let's hear from you.
Well, you're right. There are so many.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and everybody taught me a little something different.
Sure.
But one that feels just particularly close to my heart is actually someone that Sari knows and worked with a little bit as well. Uh,
Mm.
he was a student with cerebral palsy who is non-speaking, and I worked so hard to try to get him a system that would work for his that he'd be motivated to use.
Mhm,
hmm
We'd figured out that we'd figured out his switch access pretty early, um, and we'd gotten him a system that he could generate spontaneous novel communication utterances with quite a bit of effort. He
mhm,
hmm
had he had cortical visual impairment. And so over time, that became apparent. And so, having an auditory overlay was with the scanning, I learned from him.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I learned from him is, even though he didn't have very functional hand use, he really had a sensory drive to use his hands. And it didn't really work for the communication system. So this is an embarrassing story to tell. But so his communication system, he was always trying to operate it by touch. And even though, and I didn't know at the time, that his vision was not useful for symbols. And so I kept moving, so that he wouldn't do that. I kept moving his device on a longer and longer and longer arm, so it was practically impossible at the end to get through a doorway. And that didn't deter him, because he's a perseverer in life. And so two of the things that he taught me was, you need to be able to do what you need to be able to do. And so we ended up, and I don't, it's one of those, I'm embarrassed now to think about it, but we ended up using the screen as one of his switches for step scanning. And the other thing was, he really, really told me over the years, and we're talking years, over the years, that he wasn't interested in generating novel communication utterances. He was interested in connecting with you as a person and telling you things that were happening in his fairly predictable life. And so when we switched our goal from, being totally novel and accurate and precise in his communication, and moved more toward a connection kind of a system, he took off and really, really showed tremendous growth. So he taught me so much about getting to know the person and getting to know what they needed to do and what they wanted to do, and to value that over any concocted idea that I had of the way it should be done.
Yeah, I love that, because you are coming in with a lot of knowledge and you have experiences, and you've read what's new and how to do this, and you've talked to your OT or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's about being comfortable enough to sit and listen, being comfortable with your plan enough to change it and hear what that student is telling you, and
truly valuing his plan.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think about that too, especially with those, when I work with people with cerebral palsy whose intelligibility is low, their first instinct may be to try to tell you verbally, even if the intelligibility is 5%. And they get to. And I never want to take that away. And I think about people with other diagnoses who don't have that necessarily apparent or obvious internal drive to communicate with you. You can't even teach that, and it's like, I do not want to change that. You get to say every single thing you want to say, and then we will repair the breakdown where we hear the breakdowns. Whereas I'm not here to make sure that you say all the right things in the right way, the right order, the MLU, the whatever. You get to say it even if I don't understand it, because that is keeping you engaged. That's keeping you true to yourself. And we're not replacing your voice with this technology. We are augmenting it. And so you get to say it even if nobody understands it. And guess what? Eventually we all end up speaking junior, right? I mean, we all end up halfway understanding that kid. And we would only do that, if we let them continue to do it. Both of your situations, though, what I'm hearing, and I love it, is like, I learned more from them maybe than they learned from you. And that's a humbling reality,
Yeah.
right? Is that we actually
Yeah.
learn more from them than they do from us. And they are so patient and generous with us. I mean, I think about the kid Cathy was talking about with the switches are on the wrong side. I mean, how patient was he to wait? Like, I don't know.
Oh
Hopefully
yeah.
he
It
figures
was
it
a
out this
while.
session, yeah, right. Like, let's just see. And they're so patient with us, and they deserve at least that in return,
Well,
from
and
us.
there's not one of us who can't say, I did everything perfectly in my career with all these students, right? We all have these stories of saying, oh my goodness. And or what I've learned now, if I could go back and do XYZ. And I know both of you, I think we'll hear more at the end, are you're still active in this world. So I'm excited to hear a bit about what you're doing now. Um, but it requires some problem solving, right? It requires some listening and some reflection, and then a lot of problem solving along the way for us to move forward in the field and move forward with our students. What mindsets do we need to avoid, or are there systematic hangups to keep that momentum and creativity? Barb, I'll start with you.
Well, I was often painted green with envy when talking with Cathy about her financial resources. And one of the things that I learned was to look everywhere for financial resources. And so we ended up writing a lot of grants and receiving a lot of grants. And they were for a variety of things that ended up growing our kids in our department a lot. One of them was with the Toyota Tapestry grant for science in education, and we paired students with students in our most complicated bodies with students in who had complex thinking, and we put them together, and we got, at that time it was called a Cooper car. It was a little battery run switch operated car, and we put together teams with several classes. We put together teams that were pit crews and drivers, and we connected with retired Boeing engineers, and they provided classes to everybody about about movement. And so we did a variety of studies on the effects of friction and incline and whatnot on our Cooper car, and our pit crews took data, and our drivers went through the paces, and then at the end we had a Grand Prix where we all shared what we learned, and just the community involvement in that, and it was just a really wonderful thing. And another thing we did was we looked at for training for our staff. We looked at a local library guild who was offering some money for training adults, training teachers. And so they provided us with a weekend at a hotel right off the freeway in our town. And we had the most wonderful time learning together, teachers and SLPs and OTs, learning together about the technology and developing things for our classrooms as a group. So I'd say that just exercise creativity in every way you can think of, and often that can be financially.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of creativity in those goals you had when they came and you had the derby. You weren't just doing, let's do a race, right? There was so much more in that. That's so fascinating.
And I think too, so I mean, time and money, right? That's what everybody says we don't have enough of. And so advocating for that and getting creative around that is kind of one thing. But the other thing is that making sure that it's inclusive and it creates a sense of belonging, and it's bigger than the community that has the need. creates an investment, not just in time and money, but in interest, right? I'm invested in these people and these kids in this event. And so you get different kinds of investment if you create opportunities where the connection and belonging are high on that list too. I love that example.
Mm-hmm. Cathy, what would you say? How to stay creative? What advice do you give us in problem solving?
Well, I would say one thing that's always been important to me is with your students, really assume competence, especially when the students are new to us. Maybe they're English language learners, maybe they have very complex bodies. It makes technology use more of a challenge a lot of times, but just like starting from that place where we just assume they're going to be able to do it. And don't be so certain also that a particular technology is a magic bullet, like that's going to solve all the problems. In doing so, sometimes we focus more on the tool than what the student's actual need is.
Definitely.
And also assuming one technology doesn't fit everybody. I know universal design is important, but sometimes you might need to go that next step and find some really specialized technology that fits a particular student's need. And we had a vision specialist. We were fortunate in our district, we had a vision specialist too. And so sometimes they weren't familiar with some assistive technology pieces. So kind of brainstorming together. And, I was learning a lot from them, but then I'd also make some suggestions, or if I was going to a trade show or something, I would sort of be on the lookout too. And then just keeping any solution totally student-centered. It's really important that they're in the center of your decision-making. So those are just some concepts I try to live by.
Those are solid. That just flows with everything you guys have said so far today. Right. Keeping it about the students, that you're not working in a silo, and that it's meaningful. It's about the students. It's about authentic communication and involving others. And then we never know the impact that makes on other people, right? Like those engineers that came in, or yeah, that's wonderful. So you both are retired, and I know personally that you're living your lives, and so fun to hear about what you're doing personally. But thinking about your impact, and I know this is kind of a tough question. Brendan, I can think a lot about your impact, but what do you hope? Where do you hope you've made an impact? Or what advice do you have for people wanting to help grow the field? Either of those two things, we're curious about. Cathy, we could start with you if you're.
Yeah, I think hopefully that providing a means to make our students sort of as independent and confident as possible. And to help them be part of an inclusive school environment in their larger community. So working with the student, the staff, and the family, that was really important to me to kind of look holistically. Yeah, and then sort of circling back to, Barb mentioned not working in a silo, and we've touched on this some already, but not just forming those connections with information services, but like the curriculum department, teaching and learning, the early learning department, instructional technology for professional development, the gen ed teachers, parent groups, or even the foundations that kind of help fund things in your schools. So just finding time to connect with us, and it's hard, our time is limited, but making those connections and not working in a silo, and also try to be involved in some of the leadership decisions if you possibly can get on some of those teams. I was surprised. I was on like a special ed leadership team, and I was surprised even within special education, a lot of times I'd have to raise my hand and like, have you thought about this aspect of it for our
Right.
students that have
Right.
these needs? So, even within that department, we still need a voice at the
Mhm.
table.
Yes.
So those are
Make
things
yourself.
I think hopefully that made an impact. And it looks like we've got a great team that has continued on since I left about a year ago.
Mhm.
And they're really thriving and doing well. But hopefully some of the groundwork was laid for that. And
Mhm.
it'll just kind of continue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Barb, how about you?
Well, I think about personal impact, and I think about um, career impact, and
Mhm.
personal impact. I think, and Cathy had said this before, the idea of presuming competence, and the idea uh, that I always believed in my kids, and their parents knew that I always believed in their kids. And that is at my retirement party. Those were examples and stories that I heard about, that were long lasting impacts on people, and that's what we all do. So that's nothing about me and my personal impact, but I think it's such an important impact that we all make, is that we believe in those around us. And in terms of my AT career, I did a lot of training within our district, and I felt like I really worked to build capacity with staff, and applying the same idea when working with staff, presuming competence, but not necessarily presuming knowledge. And that what some of the feedback that I heard from staff that I worked with was a lot of, and this was early on in the field, a lot of technology classes were really scary for people because they felt like they were left in the dust. And the feedback that I got from people was that that they were comfortable in their learning. And so I just think about how important it is that we meet people, kids and staff, where they're at,
right,
and challenge them with high levels of learning, but provide the support that they need to get there.
right.
Yeah, well put. Well put. Well, and we didn't get a lot of time to talk about this, but you two are both wonderful mentors and have been for many different people that you may not even realize you've done that for, within our field and probably your personal lives too. But in the sense that, like Brenda said, when you came on, you make people feel comfortable and you help ask questions that turn people into leaders and change makers themselves and careers. And so we value that. We recognize that. What's something you think maybe people don't know about you that you want to share, or perhaps you have a new project or an interest area or anything?
Tell us what retirement's like.
You get to do all the fun stuff all the time.
Yeah. Well, Barb, I know that you haven't stopped. You're volunteering.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm volunteering in our local school district up here, and I'm still connected with friends in Everett, and still providing some. We're still carrying on conversations with my old friends in Everett and up here. So right when I retired, the book Comprehensive Literacy for All came out, and actually my friends here, Sari and Brenda, both recommended that I read that, as well as the person that I was volunteering with here in Bellingham. And so I did, and boy, it lit a fire. I knew what I wanted to do now that I could choose anything that I wanted to do, I knew what I wanted to do. And so it meshed really well with my need to declutter and downsize. I went through all my all my old children's books and looked at them through the lens of how could these books be used to support comprehensive literacy for all strategies, and put them into a book collection and created activity plans for each of the books along with picture supports for those. And it's now housed on the SETC website, and we'll just hopefully continue to grow and hopefully meet people's needs.
Yeah, that's such a great resource. We really hope you'll check it out. We'll put the link to it when we post this podcast, because there's so much there and you've spent so much time, and we really love it because it's a way for people to say, oh, okay, I can see how I might do this, and then take it and make it their own and be creative in their own work. So thank you, Barb, for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an amazing
Cathy,
resource.
Yeah. What have you been up to? Or
so yeah, retirement's been great. It's given me a chance to travel. I just got back from Morocco and I did like a craft and textile tour of Morocco that was fabulous, with just 12 women. Most of them were Australian, some people from Great Britain, and a couple of us Americans. And just spending more time with my family has been wonderful, and pursue some creative projects that I kind of put on hold over the years. I love to sew and do photography and things like that. So I'm really enjoying that. I said I would give myself kind of a 1-year sabbatical after I retired. And it sort of coincided, and this is sort of on a personal note. I've had 2 pretty major retina surgeries. And so a lot of last year was kind of finding out I had it a second time and having another surgery and adapting to that. But what was so fascinating to me about it was kind of being on the other side of assistive technology, and some of the anxiety I felt around like what is going to be the outcome with my vision, that type of thing. I'm doing great now. Both the surgeries were successful and that type of thing. But it's like, yeah, maybe I could use a different font, or maybe I'll do this, or maybe I'll listen to more audiobooks. And things I have been recommending for people to do, I find myself doing. So that was kind of interesting. But I do sort of feel like I wanted a little time to explore options or decide what I want to do. And one thing I'm sort of interested in pursuing is setting up some kind of consulting practice. I'm especially interested in working with AT specialists or coordinators, especially ones with like newer departments, or maybe they're newer to the field. And what are some processes and systems that can help them run their department more efficiently? So that's something, I've been considering. And I learned a lot about that by tapping into the larger resources in our district. Like, we shared the same help desk ticketing system that information services did. Rather than do our own thing on the side, we tapped into a larger thing. And that also made the district more aware of how we were supporting people. Even the inventory system for our library got so big, we tapped into the district library type inventory system and integrated with that. So some of those things were really helpful in helping our department run more efficiently. So those are some things I'm interested in.
Yeah, I know you'll have a lot to share with people around that. And there's going to be some really lucky AT people who can work with you on that. So that's exciting.
It sounds like you step away and you get a minute and you go, you know what I really love doing, right? And that's when I really love literacy, or I really love the problem solving with those in those beginning stages, and then you get to do that. Which is exciting.
It's pretty wonderful.
Is grandchildren too.
Yeah, they keep you focused.
Yes,
keep you balanced.
Test out those books you're working on, and
they're my readers. Yes, that way I know which ones to focus, which ones to prioritize,
Well, we just love hearing from you too. I think we could go on and on. And
Yeah.
you've given so much to the field and to us personally. I know we've both been touched by you and have learned a lot from you both. So thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be sure to put your contact information because we know others are going to want to hear from you as well.
Yes,
So.
thank you both.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, it was great.
So much fun.